Hey, it's Dr. Crone again. In this video, we're going to look at types of non-revolutionary contention and conflict. This is the second video in this week's unit. Be sure you watch the revolution video first. All political actions involve some form of conflict. It's the basic definition of politics. On the right side of this slide, you can see the normal political conflict, which takes place within existing institutions of government. Things like elections, party infighting, the struggle to pass legislation, all those are examples of normal political conflict within existing institutions. So getting back to our Bernie Sanders example from the last video, Bernie's challenge to the more moderate leaders of the Democratic Party absolutely falls into the category of normal political conflict. On the left side of the slide, you see what political scientists call contention. That's a broad category of conflict that opposes existing institutions of government. In the previous video, we talked about one type of contention, revolution. In this video, we'll explore other non-revolutionary types of contention. Your textbook breaks down the category of non-revolutionary contention into 5 types: social movements, insurgencies, coup d'etat, terrorism, and everyday resistance. As with all these categories in comparative politics, we need to treat these as abstract types and recognize that most examples of real-life contention probably won't be easy to pigeonhole. Let's take a look at each of these categories in turn. The first type of contention we'll look at is a social movement. The anti-Chinese Hong Kong protest movement is a really good example. Social movements are long-term and organized actions outside the realm of normal politics. They aren't usually violent, because if they become violent, then they begin to fall into the category of insurgency instead. Furthermore, they're not just riots, they are organized, usually with some kind of leadership and mass communication channels. But their power centers in ordinary citizens. The greater the number of participants, the greater the political power. Another category of non-revolutionary contention is the insurgency. An insurgency is a violent, armed uprising against the state. Its goal is to overthrow the government by armed means. Because insurgent groups are usually smaller and less powerful than the militaries they're rising up against, they often use tactics like guerrilla warfare to damage the state. Guerrilla tactics are designed to create a stalemate rather than a complete military victory, and therefore insurgencies can often go on for years and even decades. An insurgency is different than a social movement because of its reliance on violent tactics. When social movements choose to become violent, they can turn into insurgencies. In real-life ongoing situations, it is very difficult to delineate the lines between insurgency, civil war, and revolution. Remember, these are abstract categories. Most political scientists consider civil war to be a type of insurgency, and then a revolution would be considered a type of civil war, and in fact a successful civil war, where the insurgents succeed in overthrowing the state. The factors involved in distinguishing an insurgency from civil war include the severity of the conflict, the size and strength of the insurgent forces, and the intensity of the government's military response. For example, if a government can contain a rebellion by scattered one-off police actions, we would probably call that an insurgency. But if the military has to resort to an ongoing bombing campaign, for example, against rebel positions, that would probably come nearer to the definition of a civil war. A coup d'etat is a different type of contention than any of the others we've mentioned so far, because a coup does not usually have a mass component. Instead, it's an action taken by elites to overthrow an existing leader or a ruling political party. Coups, by definition, represent a blow against institutions and usually have an unconstitutional element to them. So removing a sitting president by constitutional means, such as impeachment, would not be considered a coup. Also, by definition, coups are not democratic because they are extra-constitutional and elite-driven. Some coups take place within the context of a social movement, when a leader or group of leaders sees the climate of social unrest as an opportunity to remove a rival leader. This actually happened in Egypt after the political protests that followed the 2013 election of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, backed by the Egyptian military, seized the social unrest as an opportunity to take power away from Morsi. The next type of non-revolutionary conflict is terrorism. This is very hard to define, and political scientists are currently in flux as to how to define what is terrorism and what is not. That's at least partly because it has such a negative connotation. Terrorists don't label themselves that way. But we can make a few assertions about the most common understanding of terrorism: that it is violent, it is motivated by some kind of adherence or devotion to a non-majority political or religious belief, and it's designed to inspire fear in civilians in the hope of them pressuring the government rather than attacking the government itself. Finally, a very interesting form of political contention is called everyday resistance. Everyday resistance could include actions such as work slowdowns, singing protest songs, or telling stories whose underlying message is subversive. These are less organized than social movements and more reliant on individual action. Motivations for everyday resistance differ depending on what is being resisted. For example, some forms of everyday resistance come from people who live in situations where they're afraid for their lives to do anything more contentious. In Nazi Germany, brave citizens relied on everyday resistance because more public actions were not possible. The picture on the left shows a baker in Nazi Germany who baked poison into the bread of Nazi soldiers. That's an excellent example of everyday resistance. But even in a free society, resistance might be undertaken by citizens who otherwise feel powerless against a large bureaucracy, for example. The photo on the right shows that type. In the late 1960s, US taxpayers resisted the demands of the IRS. They paid their taxes, but deliberately violated the stated rules for filling out the computer punch card tax returns. The card said, "Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate," and some taxpayers resisted by folding them, stapling them, or writing all over them before they were submitted.